President Donald Trump spoke from the NATO summit at The Hague. He said the pledge to spend 5% of GDP on defense by 2035 was a monumental win for the United States. He added that NATO Secretary General was doing a fantastic job. Trump spent a lot of his time discussing the recent strikes on Iran and said that they were successful, and he pointed to a statement from Iran's foreign ministry spokesperson this Wednesday, which said there had been extensive damage done to the country's nuclear program. Trump followed on and hit out at U.S. media, bashing CNN, the New York Times, and MSNBC over reports that the U.S. strike only set the Iranian program back a couple of months. The war in Ukraine was mentioned too, but he did not really pledge continued U.S. support for that effort. For more on this story, we can go across to France 24's Kethevane Gorjestani standing by at The Hague. Kethevane, there was a lot that the U.S. President Donald Trump discussed, but something he was very happy about was this pledge to up defense spending on GDP to 5% by 2035, but he did single out one country in particular.
Yes, the country singled out was Spain, and I'll get back to that later. But the fact that Donald Trump was extremely happy with this announcement means that this NATO summit was a success, because really this 5% spending goal increase was meant to make Donald Trump happy. It was meant to gift Donald Trump with a monumental victory, as he called it, because he's the one who's been pushing not only for the 5% in the past few months, but for years he's been pushing for allies, especially the Europeans, to pay more of their fair share into the NATO defense. So he was extremely pleased with that decision, and he was helped in that with the comments, especially of the NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, who throughout the day and even before that, with that text message that he sent Donald Trump, praised Donald Trump, really saying that no other U.S. president had done that, could have done that, and that it was thanks to him that NATO allies finally took that step. So that was a big victory. But there were two things to note about that pledge to increase spending to 5%. One is the comment that Donald Trump made when he said that he's hoping that all that GDP is going to be spent on hardware, not bureaucracy, a sort of hint at the fact that the 5% is actually split between a core defense spending, the 3.5%, that means weapons, troops, things like that, but also 1.5% of sort of aligned, defense-aligned expenditures like infrastructure, cybersecurity, and other things. He also added that hopefully, if it's spent on hardware, that hardware will be made in America. And there were a lot of Europeans here who had different ideas. The French, for example, insisting that the Europeans need to produce more weapons, not simply buy weapons from the Americans. And some of the smaller countries like Croatia insisting that, well, if you want us to spend more and to increase our capabilities, you need to sort of keep the cost of those weapons that we might buy to a minimum so that we can make the most of the amount that we're spending. Now, to get back to the ones that have been singled out, the Spaniards, Donald Trump calling them unfair, saying that they were really the problem within NATO, that he didn't understand why Spain was such a problem. And he even threatened the Spaniards, threatening them with more tariffs, with a trade war, saying that they would pay one way or another. And if it was not through NATO, he was going to make them pay another way. So we'll see if that sort of pushes a little bit the Spaniards to align themselves. But so far, they have also agreed to that declaration. The question is, down the road, over the next year, 2, 3, 5 years, 10 years, how much the Spaniards are actually going to follow through on that declaration.
Kethevane, I have to ask you about something else, because Donald Trump spoke for a long time, but he spent very little of his speech talking about Ukraine. He met Ukraine's President Vladimir Zelensky, but from what we understand, it was a closed-door meeting. We don't have images of that meeting. What do you make of that? Is U.S. support going to continue to Kyiv?
Look, the issue of Ukraine was sort of put to the side a little bit during the summit, and that was once again a sort of a compromise or concession made to Donald Trump in a way, because they wanted to avoid having any sort of clash or disagreement over Ukraine. You look into the declaration, yes, there is mention of Ukraine, but it's very minimal, and it's more about continuing support without more details, and saying that any support for Ukrainian defense, direct support for Ukrainian defense, will go to the sort of 5%, will be calculated in that 5%. But other than that, and adding that there is a threat from Russia, there was not much about Ukraine. That doesn't mean that NATO allies didn't discuss Ukraine. Vladimir Zelensky featured prominently yesterday. He had multiple bilaterals today. But as you said, this meeting with Donald Trump happened behind closed doors. We heard from my former colleagues in the U.S. Press pool who were actually blocked outside of that room for about 30 minutes before they were told that actually, no, you're not going to get to go in and see the two presidents speaking together. So not much information coming out of what happened into that briefing room. All we can say is that Donald Trump didn't go on the offense during his press conference when it comes to Ukraine. He was more critical of Russia and more critical of Vladimir Putin, and he was asked about further support for Ukraine. Once the money that was voted on under Joe Biden runs out, he was asked whether there would be more money for Ukraine. He sort of didn't answer that question directly, so we don't really know what he means. But he was also asked about whether or not the U.S. was willing to give more Patriot missile defense systems to the Ukrainians, something that the Ukrainians have been asking for a while now. And he said that he was going to look into it and that maybe that would be a possibility. Maybe that will likely be music to Ukrainian ears if that actually turns out to be true. But yes, Ukraine sort of pushed a little bit on the sideline, but also nothing really serious or concerning, at least, coming out of Donald Trump when it comes to Ukraine.
Thank you very much for that, Kethevane Gorjestani reporting that from the NATO summit now.